Ricky Greenwell here, bringing you another makeup tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be looking at wounds and cuts, and my model for today is Seth. So I'm going to first start off with a simple cut style wound. This is a basic two-dimensional cut that's just simply using some black, I'm using a detail brush and some black paint just to go in and give me a fat or cut lip to Seth's lip. So this is going to do a couple things. This is going to give me a placement so I know where the wound needs to be. It's going to add a deep contour, and it's going to tell me where I need to put the blood before, or for the placement of my blood before he goes on set, or possibly before filming. So you don't want to do blood until the very last minute. Because the gravity of the blood makes all the difference. So if Seth is standing versus if he's laying down, where that blood will be flowing is going to be key for the convincing or the selling of wound makeup. I'm now moving into cat scratch style makeup, and here I'm just utilizing a black stipple sponge. I have kind of cut some of those edges down on this particular sponge, and I'm going to do a 3-tone process. So here I'm just utilizing some blood color. I'm going to go in with the opposite side of my stipple sponge with just a hint of black to give me some abrasion or scratch. And here I'm just kind of doing a little bit of drag marks. And lastly, I'll be going in with a product called coagulated blood, just to give me some blood effects. So there's moments that are going to be a little bloody. To enhance that, I'm going to be using just a water bottle and misting it with some water. I'm going to take a tissue to pull off the excess around the wound. I'm still trying to get the wound a little bit on the glossy side. And now I'm going in with an eyedropper, and I'm placing my blood into the cut lip for Seth's application. And here I'm just taking a fine Q-tip, and I'm cleaning up the blood that's not on my black line itself. So I'm wanting that line to be my shadow. So if I were to do an extreme close-up in this, we're going to see that kind of fade of that shadow, but then the blood looks like it's actually coming from the skin. So you're just taking the time to clean any area that is not your cut line that you've indicated. And here we just have a simple two-dimensional cut and some abrasion or cat scratch style wounds. Now I'm going to be going on to my three-dimensional wound, and here I'm just utilizing a little bit of spirit gum, or in this particular incident I'm using some matte adhesive. I've applied it to where I'm going to start my initial sculpt on Seth, which is going to be a bullet or a gunshot wound, or a bullet wound I should say. I'm going to be, just like with everything with spirit gum, I've applied a little bit of spirit gum. I'm using a birchwood stick to tap that up because this is a pressure-sensitive glue, so it's getting a little on the sticky side. And then I'm getting my my mortician's wax, or my nose and scar wax, and I've created my wound shape. And I'm going to use my palette knife to kind of shape that out or blend my edges into Seth's skin. So now I'm just taking my palette knife, and what I'm going to be doing is working around the wound, and I'm going to be blending the wax into Seth's skin, making sure that I'm kind of keeping his hair both off the glue as well as out of the wax that I'm working in. And I have a tissue in my hand, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sculpting my shape, and then as I have extra wax, I'm taking that and putting it into the tissue, and I'm utilizing my palette knife to both blend and scrape off extra wax as I'm working. And now I've added just a little bit of castor oil to my ring finger, and I'm going to be kind of blending that around the edge of the wound to blend it into Seth's skin. And now you can see that I'm kind of scraping off some of that extra wax. Now I'm taking my stipple sponge, and I'm actually adding some pore texture to the wound or to the wax so that it's not so smooth and irregular. I'm trying to create that skin pore texture. Now I'm going through and adding some of that blood color. I'm stippling some of that in and around the wound. Now I'm just taking my ring finger and I'm dabbing into the product, I'm trying to go for a more transparency look. So I'm trying to just blend that into both the wax and the area around the skin to give that flushed, blood red or swollen appearance to the skin. Here I'm just taking my powder puff and I'm setting the product into place. That's going to also help give that appearance of that translucency by pushing the product into the skin and making it look as if it's coming from the skin. And just taking a large powder brush to dust off extra powder. Now I'm going in with a deep blood tone to fill in my wound and to give that that bloodied appearance. Now I'm going to be going in and adding like a cut style wound to Seth's cheek. Same process, I'm just adding a little bit of spirit gum to the cheek in preparation for my wax placement. And then I'm going to tap that up, make sure that it's getting tacky. Once that I know that the stick and the skin is starting to stick to each other, that way I know my spirit gum is ready for my wax. And now I've created a little bit of that wax shape. So I have my wax in place. I'm utilizing my palette knife to kind of blend that wax onto Seth's skin. So I'm going to kind of blend down, blend that top section. The key here is making sure that my appliance or my wax is kind of just blended around into the skin. Now I'm using the point of my palette knife just to pull off some of that excess wax, and also pull off some of the excess wax along the top of my wax itself of the wound. I just created a wound that was possibly a little more wax than I needed. So when you're working with wax, helpful tips or things to have on hand is some spray alcohol. That's a quick cleanse to take any wax from your fingers. Having a little bit of a castor oil around is good for blendability, because that allows you to blend the product without it sticking to your fingers. If you run fairly warm-blooded, you're going to find that the nose and scar wax will want to stick to your fingers more than it's going to want to stick to where you're placing it. This is where the spirit gum comes in handy, because it's kind of keeping it placed onto the face. You don't necessarily have to do the spirit gum layer, but I do find that it makes it a little bit more successful when you're working. Having a palette knife to shape is very helpful. Having some tissue around to clean off your palette knife. So the key here is trying to make sure that your wax and your surface is always kind of clean, and that you are placing it where you're wanting to go. Here you can see I'm just utilizing my stipple sponge to create a porous texture. It's also pulling off some of that oil. Now I'm going back in with my palette knife, and I'm actually creating the cuts to my actual wound. So I'm actually starting to develop my actual wound shape, or the tracks to the cuts. So you can see that I'm using the palette knife to kind of feather out some of the wax, so that it looks like he may have been cut with a knife with a jagged edge, so that I'm going to have a jagged element or to the wound structure here on Seth's face. Just adding some stipple texture to those edges. And now I'm going in with a deep plum tone, or like a deep blood color, and I'm filling in that deepest area of the wound first. The same principle I did with my two-dimensional wound earlier, I'm going in with my deepest tone to add that cut track to Seth's skin. Now I'm taking a stipple sponge, and I'm stipplizing some blood color onto the wound. And here I'm just doing some of those bruised effects. So I'm looking for blood reds, some deep purples, some of those tones to give me that this has been injured. And I'm just taking my ring finger, tapping that out, looking for that transparency to create that feel of swollenness within the wound. Going in with my powder puff, and I'm going to be setting my product in place. So this helps to push the product into the skin to help with that transparency and also making sure that the product is set. I'm going to do the same piece, just utilizing some spray water just to pull off some of that extra powdered look. I'm going to use a tissue to pull that off. And now I'm going to go in and start to add my blood effects. So I'm going to be filling my first my gunshot wound or my gun wound, and then I'm going to be adding blood into the tracks of my cuts. Just taking a Q-tip, making sure that I have blood where I'm wanting it to, and removing blood from areas that it should not be. And here you have your finished wax wounds, an example of a gunshot style wound and a cut. It's my hope that you learned something with me today, and remember, if you believe it's possible, you can make it possible.